And now, last but not least, I would like to invite Melanie van de Velde for her space between a darkening world and a brighter future.
Thank you. Welcome to Gotham City. Gotham City is in chaos. The bat signal is lit. But where the heck is Batman? Extremism is on the rise. We're increasingly divided, and our global temperatures are rising. Which, let's face it, doesn't sound unpleasant living in Scotland. If only it came without the rise in floods and storms, droughts, wildfires, loss of biodiversity, and acidification of our oceans. The cracks that we now start to see in our world are only the beginning. But I believe and know that we can change things around. How much darker our world will still get, or how much brighter our world will be, ultimately depends on three fundamental choices. Three choices that decide the future of our world, our mental and physical health, and even life expectancy. So tonight, I'd like to invite you to join in an experiment by simplifying these three choices in an imaginary scenario. On your imaginary journey, you're sailing across the ocean with your friends and family. At night, you see the stars brighter than you ever have. The loud splash of a humpback whale takes your breath away. But after 3 days, you end up in a storm. You can feel your heart pounding in your chest when you see a massive wave that smashes your boat to pieces. After hours of being tossed around in the waves, you're washed up on a tiny desert island. Now, while imagining yourself in this scenario, allow me to ask you a few questions. First, please can I ask you to stand to make 3 fundamental choices throughout your time on the island. For your first choice, suppose that you're in charge of all the jobs that need doing, such as building shelter, looking after the children, finding food, and ideally some entertainment. Now, please remain standing if you decide for everyone to join in to the best of their ability, or take a seat if you decide to leave some people out to do nothing. For your second choice, suppose that everyone's been working hard all day, foraging, fishing, building shelter. Now please remain standing if then at night by the campfire you decide to divide the food fairly across the group. Or take a seat if you decide to eat most of the food yourself, since you are in charge, and leave a tiny portion for everyone else. Now for your final choice, you have split into teams, and you're now in charge of foraging mushrooms. Safe mushrooms on the island are very hard to find, but there's plenty of poisonous ones, but they can make people ill or even kill them. Now please remain standing if you decide to only trade the safe mushrooms with your friends and family, or take a seat if you decide to also trade the poisonous ones in return for extra fish for you and your team to eat. It's great to see you all standing. You can take a seat now. Thank you. This simplified experiment proves that you have a defining trait in common with Batman, that you have an inner sense of justice. By tuning into your inner Batman, you have empowered everyone on the island to survive as well as possible. In reality, we kind of live on a bigger version of the island. The choices that you just made maybe seem too simple, but in reality, we often make them like the Joker, ignoring our sense of justice. It is exactly how the cracks that we now start to see in our world have crept in, and also how we can best solve them. Let's have a look at some of the biggest issues that we're facing as humanity. Across our world, we see a rise in extremism and increasingly divided and dysfunctional societies. if we want to turn this around, we have to ask ourselves why. Why are we increasingly divided? And why are we increasingly voting for more extreme views? Let's have a look at this chart. It represents the US, but inequality is rising in most countries around the world. History teaches us that inequality tends to keep rising until something extreme, like a war, resets it before it rises again. Tonight, it is 85 years ago that Dutch troops were on high alert along the border, as Germany had just invaded Denmark and Norway, and it only took another 3 weeks before the Netherlands was occupied. As you can see in the chart, we're now nearing similar levels of inequality as just before the Second World War. I'm not saying that history will repeat itself, but as leading scientists have been warning us for decades, inequality is not the best recipe for peace. So what creates the space between an even more unequal and divided world, or a more peaceful one? How can we best fix inequality and our other key global issues, such as poverty, pollution, and climate change? I love using the analogy of running a nice warm bath. And meanwhile, you're getting distracted, thinking that you're cleverly multitasking. But by the time you walk back into the bathroom, you're faced with a scene that looks like this. You may not recognize this scenario, but I sadly have to admit, I do. Whenever I ask an audience what they would do first in this situation, the answer is always to close the tap or to pull the plug. But everyone knows it doesn't make any sense to mop up the floor while leaving the bath overflowing. Yet when it comes to inequality, poverty, pollution, and climate change, this is exactly what we often do. We spend much effort dealing with the symptoms of the issues, but meanwhile, we leave the tap running wide open. Let me give you an example. This is Kibera. It's a slum in Nairobi where the average life expectancy is 30 years old. Essentially, it's a city of 1 million children and young people, and not many parents around. With one of our programs, working with the local schools, we provided food and school uniforms and school fees. And it showed me that dealing with the symptoms can be absolutely vital. But it often doesn't close the tap to the issues, and in some cases, it can actually do harm. When second-hand clothing donations ramped up in Africa, over 50% of people working in the local textile industries lost their jobs as a consequence. With another program in Kenya, we provided training and employment opportunities. And it was a real eye-opener how that can be a much more virtuous cycle out of poverty. If we want to close the tap to poverty and inequality, it ultimately comes down to the same first two choices that you just made on the island. For all of us to contribute to the best of our ability, and second, to pay each their fair share. The widening pay gap is a major driver of rising inequality and all its scary consequences. Not many economists argue that everyone should earn the same, that it's fair to recognize different contributions, such as hard work, talent, experience, or risk. But increasingly, we have started taking way more than our fair share when we can get away with it. Guess how much the pay gap between CEO and average worker has increased over the last 6 decades in the US? Over 1,500%. Many countries are heading in the exact same direction, like the UK, India, and also here in the Netherlands. Interestingly, lower pay gaps can be much better for business. Costco has a 400% lower pay gap compared to its major rival, and it outperforms it on every single major financial indicator. Its compounded revenue growth is bigger than Apple, Amazon, and Google. Costco explains it by their happier staff, leading to happier customers, leading to their exceptionally high customer loyalty rates at around 90%. We see similar injustices across many supply chains. Even fair trade prices are often not sufficient to make a living income. If a cocoa farmer in West Africa contributes 20 to 50% of a chocolate bar, then how can we justify only paying them 6%, perpetuating extreme poverty, inequality, and child labor? Tony Chocolonely paid 20 to 60% over the farm gate price, tackling the issues at its root. Most companies and organizations are very well placed to help close the tap to the issues. And by getting it right, it can be good for business too. But what I experienced in Kenya, and what I discovered years later with my research, is that the success rates also depend on something else. Beyond Food and Goodwill Solutions in the UK and Sea Talents here in the Netherlands each provide training and employment opportunities, transforming people's lives out of poverty and social exclusion. They each have a 300 to 400% better success rate compared to similar other initiatives. So what is it that they do differently? Well, as it turns out, they have the exact same pattern in common. What sets them apart is that they are a strong business first and foremost. Goodwill Solutions, for example, would unlikely have been as successful in changing people's lives and managing to be in the FTSE fastest growing companies in Europe if its logistics and warehousing services to its customers weren't as excellent first and foremost. The more we close the tap to the issues, the less we have to keep dealing with the symptoms, with a need for more food banks and more taxes on welfare. It is the exact same for other key global issues, such as climate change, pollution, and the plastics crisis. So let me tell you a story about taking our youngest daughter to swimming lessons. On our way to the pool, we passed this delightful machine, and she asked if she could buy one of the cheap plastic toys, as she had £1 pocket money left. So I tried to explain to her, well, most plastic ultimately ends up in our oceans and in landfill. And we already eat, drink, and breathe 5 grams of plastics each week. Scientists are trying to work out how bad this is for our gut, our liver, our kidneys, and our brain. And so far found a correlation with cancer and dementia. So my daughter thought about it for a moment and said, so can I buy one now? To be fair, our daughter really cares about the planet. She even made a beautiful drawing about it for my book. But of course, the links between a cheap plastic toy and the impact on our health is much less easy to see as for poisonous mushrooms. But the impact is real. By the time our daughter is in her 30s, it's estimated that there will be more plastic in our oceans than fish when measured by weight. Now that we've created the problems, we have no choice but to deal with the symptoms, like the noble efforts by the ocean cleanup. But unless we stop the mountains of plastic from entering the oceans each year, this is a losing battle. We can keep increasing our spending on cleaning up our oceans or on rising floods, storms, droughts, and wildfires due to climate change, or on illnesses due to pollution. But the more we close the tap to the issues, the less we have to keep mopping up the mess. One of my favorite examples that shows what's possible is global flooring company Interface, who have managed to turn their operations in over 110 countries around, from a high polluting and high carbon emitting business to now going beyond zero. If they can do it in a challenging sector, then any business can. if we truly want to close the tap to the biggest issues that we are facing as humanity, it ultimately comes down to the exact same choices that you made on the island. If you look closely, you notice that none of the choices that you made were based on philanthropy. But each of the choices that you stood up for is based on justice. The cracks that we now start to see in our world haven't been caused by the freedom in our economies or economic growth per se, but they have been caused by a lack of justice. It is exactly what Adam Smith warned us for when he invented our free markets. He said, "Free markets can only operate with strong principles of justice. Otherwise, our societies must crumble into atoms." So basically, he said, it can be cool to create wealth and maximize profits by creating good products and services for each other, but only if we can all contribute to the best of our ability. We pay each their fair share, and we only trade products that are safe. The more that we make these three choices like the Joker, without justice, the darker our world will still get. The more we make them like Batman, with justice, the brighter our future will be. So therefore, my challenge to you is, can you mirror the choices that you made tonight as part of your organization, or by buying from or investing in companies that lead in at least one of these three areas? You are naturally wired like Batman, with an instinctive sense of justice. Some say, but humans are selfish. Yes, we can be. But for 85% of us, when we are too selfish to the extent that it's unjust to others, it damages our own physical and mental health and even reduces our life expectancy. So by tuning into your inner Batman and bringing justice to our free markets, you will not only change our world in a powerful way, but you will live a healthier, more fulfilled, and longer life. I'll leave you with my all-time favorite quote by Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Thank you.